The power of positive thinking never resonated with me. Nobody wants to be told to be positive. That positive thinking is probably the number one reason this industry has not grown in my 44 years of living. Positive thinking in many cases repulses people. You're telling me to be positive and I'm going through a divorce. You're telling me to be positive and I threw 3 interceptions. You're telling me to be positive and I got to deal with this president. You're telling me to be positive and I got this current situation. You're telling me to be positive and I got this health situation. So then what's the alternative? What we learned was that negative thinking was the most powerful element that our players were combating. That negative thinking was weaponizing them against them. So how's negativity carried? Well, is it your internal thoughts? Well, if you're dealing with trying to change internal thoughts, then you got to go to affirmations and you got to go to imagery, you got to go to visualization. Very difficult skills. Well, we started to look at the externalization. Well, if somebody says something out loud, it's 10 times more powerful than if they think it. And then as we started to study the data, particularly data that was just reinforced by Christine Porath from Georgetown and Harvard, that negativity is a multiple of 4 to 7 times more powerful than positivity. So think about that. If I say something out loud, it's 10x. If it's negative, it's 4 to 7 times more powerful. So when I say negative things out loud, it's 40 to 70 times more likely that that will happen or cause a result that won't be good for me than if I just didn't say anything. What if we could just get our players to not say stupid things out loud? What if we could just do that? Not teach any element of positive thinking, but eliminate conversations about the Heat, complaining about coaches, complaining about circumstances, complaining about situations, verbalizing negativity. But we weren't going to lie to them and say, hey, be positive. We just taught them the data. And then what we did was some of the things that you noticed in the book, the stories in and around negativity are incredible. So Pistol Pete Maravich, a basketball player, I'll give you 2 other examples, but he was interviewed at 26 years old and he said, I don't want to play 10 years of pro basketball and die at the age of 40 of a heart attack. Well, he played 10 years of pro basketball and in Pasadena, California, died of a heart attack at 40. There's another great story that I saw from a magazine called Success Unlimited in 1973. A guy is hired to fix a refrigerated boxcar in back of a train. He goes into the train, he panics, gets himself locked inside the boxcar. So now he's pounding on the door, there's nothing to do. He starts to panic and thinks he's gonna freeze to death. He finds a pen, he starts writing down, Tom, what's going through his mind, and he writes down, I'm becoming colder. As people, one of the things we do to ourselves is observe and report. I'm not playing well, I'm having a bad day, we're having a bad quarter, my marriage isn't going well. We observe and report. Still colder now, he writes, nothing to do but wait. Half asleep, I can hardly write. Finally, he says, these may be my last words. And I'll show you the article. They open up the boxcar many hours later and they find him and he's dead. But the temperature inside the boxcar was 56 degrees.
That's so crazy.
The freezing apparatus was broken. There was plenty of air in the boxcar. There was no physical reason for his death. The best they could say is somehow he talked himself into dying. So negativity is the most powerful thing we're combating. Look at our politics today. A positive message versus a negative message, it's no chance. If we could just learn how to not be negative, how to not externalize negative, then ultimately that would help them more than ever trying to be told to be positive. So I'll give you a great story. So we both grew up in Tacoma, and there used to be a thing called Toastmasters. I don't know if you remember Toastmasters, but Toastmasters was a local, regional, and a national speaking group for anybody that wanted to get better at speaking. Well, my dad had gone to a Toastmasters early on and heard one of the most successful magazine entrepreneurs in the world speak. He comes back and tells me, I just had a chance to hear one of the most successful magazine entrepreneurs in the world speak. And he said, when are you taking your SAT? I said, I'm taking it next year. He said, well, this guy was failing out of high school. He was struggling. He was raised by a single mom in the Midwest, but he promised his mother he would take a test called the SAT. So he takes the SAT in May, his junior year, doesn't expect anything, gets his score back in June. Now the SAT, which I don't know how many your population know, but it's a standardized test with the math part and a verbal part. Both are scored out of 800 points. Well, this guy takes it, he's bombing, he's failing out of school, he doesn't expect anything as he's telling the story at Toastmasters. Well, he gets a 1480 out of 1600. So he's stunned, right? That would be for the smart people that listen to your podcast.
Insane, yeah.
Right, cognitive dissonance. Right?
I got a 900 on my SATs just
right.
to give people a frame.
Right, and I got a
990, excuse me.
And I got a 1010, right? I was just, hey, 4 digits. It was a miracle, right? But it's a hard test, and it's a variety of different things. So he gets the score, and his mother, doing what any mother would do, knowing her kid, says, "Did you cheat?" Right? She knows her son. And he said, "I swear to God, I tried to cheat, but the way the numbers were and the scantrons and the bubbles, you couldn't cheat." So she says, "You mean to tell me you really got that score?" He said, "Yeah, I got the score." So he's stunned, Tom. So as my dad's telling me the story, I'm like, okay. So he says, all right. So what he decides is, because he realizes he's smart and he's going into his senior year, he says, "I'm going to go to class." Now he starts to go to class. He doesn't hang out with who he did when he didn't go to class. All right. Teachers see him in class and they said, "Hey, maybe Franklin Pierce, maybe we missed the boat on this kid." So they start to treat him differently. Well, as the guy would tell the story, he graduates, goes to a community college, goes on to Wichita State, goes on to the Ivy League, and becomes this massively successful magazine entrepreneur. So I said, okay, well, the guy was always smart. He just needed a standardized test to unlock it. My dad said, "No, that's not the story, and this is what I want you to understand." He said, 12 years after all this guy's success, he gets a letter in the mail from Princeton, New Jersey. Doesn't think anything about it. The next day, his wife says, "You're going to open it." He opens it. True story, turns out the SAT board will periodically review their test-taking procedures and the policies. The year he took the test, he was one of 13 people sent the wrong SAT score. His actual score was a 740 out of 1600. And he said, "People think my whole life changed when I got the 1480. But what happened? My whole life changed when I started acting like a 1480. And what does a 1480 do? He goes to class." Well, this is one of the first stories I would share when I had my opportunity at Alabama, or Florida State, or Georgia. So A, your language is powerful, but number two, your behavior is way ahead of your success. And so many people let their feelings dictate what they do, as opposed to throw your behavior out there. I think the lesson my dad was trying to teach me ultimately was, in addition to my language, what I do, not how I feel about my past, is going to determine who I am in the future. I think neutral thinking isn't just thinking. I think it's behavior, and I think it's language. And so your behavior is what's going to change you. But you also have to start by asking yourself, what do I want, and why do I want it? Why don't I have it? What am I willing to do to get it? And I do think, in terms of listening to one of your earlier podcasts, I do think there's value in writing things down, but in a really simple way. I've learned probably the most things through the best athletes in the world, and Michael Johnson, who had the gold shoes. I'll never forget, Drew Brees were training for the NFL Combine in 2001. There's 18 guys. Michael just finished winning his 4th gold medal, and he comes in and he's just a badass dude.
Fastest man alive at that
Fastest man alive at that point. He had just run the 43.18, and then when he ran the 19.3, it was 26 miles per hour. The fastest 50 to 150, he ran 9.1 flat. So all these athletes were in awe of Michael. And I think Drew at the time says, "Hey man, do you set goals?" He said, "Yeah." He said, "Where'd you learn?" He said, "What do you mean, where'd I learn?" So where'd you learn? Like, do you learn in college? He said, "I didn't learn in college." He said, "Did you learn like SMART goals?" Like, what the fuck are SMART goals? And SMART goals are specific, measurable, attainable, realistic, and with a time frame. Michael said, "When I would go into Safeway, I recognized that if I walked into Safeway and I wrote 8 things down, I would walk into Safeway and I'd walk out of Safeway in 5 minutes. If I walked into Safeway and had nothing written down, I would be in there for 20 minutes and I'd find myself on aisle 8 and I'd be anxious and I'd be nervous and I'd be, why am I looking at the wheat thins and the ho-hos when I know I don't need any of those things?" And he said, so because I wrote it down in Safeway and it worked, I figured, why would I be any different about my athletic career? Don't say stupid shit out loud. Be mindful of what you consume. If I watch 3 minutes of news that increases my probability by 27%, I'm going to say I had a shitty day. What are the things that are in our control? What we watch when we get home, what we listen to when we're in our car, who we talk to when we get on our cell phone, and what we say out loud always as we speak. And I think that those are the powerful things, and ultimately our behavior is what's going to define our success. And this generation right now, Generation Z and Generation Y, both think they can do whatever the fuck they want to do and still achieve things. You can achieve whatever you want to do in many cases if you're willing to get behind the behaviors that drive that success. So many people think the self-help industry is about things you do. I think one of the things that makes athletes so incredible is what they're willing not to do, what they're willing not to say, what they're willing not to eat, what they're willing not to consume, what they're willing not to watch. That's what makes, think about, it's January 2020, what are 5 things you cannot do right now that will instantly make your life better?